So ends the reading. These are the times, said Thomas Paine, that try men's souls. And they are trying ours now. I'm sure I don't need to get into the litany of political divisions and stressors that threaten our democracy and our central nervous systems. This time, last week, I was awake half the night before Sunday morning, refreshing my computer to find out if the President of the United States had survived the night, suffering from the virus he had earlier publicly decried as a liberal conspiracy. Our souls are beyond tired. They are worn thin, threadbare from an onslaught of lies and oppressive policy decisions, from the threat to our bodily autonomy as women and Black and Indigenous people of color, from the threat to our most basic civil liberties of marriage and the right to vote. Our souls have been tried. At this point, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks asks, is there something we can do, each of us, to be able to face the future without fear? I think there is, he says. One way into it is to see that perhaps the most simple way into a culture and into an age is to ask the question, what do people worship? People have worshipped so many things throughout time, the sun, the stars, the storm. Some people worship many gods, some one, some none. What do we worship? I think future anthropologists will take a look at the books we read on self-help, self-realization, self-esteem. They'll look at the way we talk about morality as being true to oneself, the way we talk about politics as a matter of individual rights. And they'll look at this wonderful new religious ritual we've created. You know the one, called the selfie. I think they will conclude that what we worship in our time is the self, the I. So, I wonder, how do we make that move from I to we? How do we release obsession over our own comfort, our own fate, and focus our energy on the other, on we? Well, one thing we have to do is get proximate to those who are suffering. I have been blessed to know what it is like to be proximate with someone who is struggling, who is on the margins of society. I have had the chance to build that trust. I grasped it as a child when my church, the Third Unitarian Church of Chicago, after the worship service, every single Sunday, we would walk across the street together to the Harriet Tubman House. That was an interfaith homeless shelter that we ran with a number of other congregations in the neighborhood. And each Sunday, we would walk over across the street and we would make lunch and serve food to folks. And then, after serving food, we would sit down and eat with them like humans, like friends, just leveling the field, engaging in simple lunchtime conversation week after week until we became true friends. We learned about each other's likes and dislikes. We recognized each other on the street in the neighborhood. And until I was 12 years old, when I thought about church, like we're going to church, I thought about that entire experience. The RE class, Sunday worship, and then serving and eating food with people who are hungry. That entire experience was church. And I still believe that. Then later, many years later, as a young adult, in my early 20s, I was an HIV/AIDS prevention educator. And my job was to go into prisons and juvenile justice centers, drug treatment centers, and halfway houses all across western North Carolina. I had a 19-county region I was responsible for. And I was to implement a safe-sex curriculum. Now, as a 22-year-old Yankee white girl, fresh out of my liberal arts college, you can imagine how well I was received. in these environments. Yeah, they did not take me very seriously, just showing up with my condoms and other paraphernalia to the jail. So, on day one, I didn't do very much. I didn't try to implement my curriculum. I just asked them about themselves, tried to share a little bit about who I was if they cared, which they kind of didn't, to be honest. They rolled their eyes, they cracked jokes at my expense, and I came back the next week with small books or anything I was allowed to bring from the outside. And I came back the week after that. It took a couple of months of me returning week after week, steadfast, until the women were finally ready to talk about what was really going on in their lives, until we could talk about sexual health and safety and relationships and abuse of men and all the things in their lives that made it really difficult to stay safe. And when they got released, we'd recognize each other on the streets, be like, "Hey, Taryn." And sometimes I'd see them out in the bars or the clubs. Remember, I was in my 20s at the time. These women and men and young people I met, we embraced each other. They left an imprint on my life, kind of like Brian Stevenson's grandmother left her imprint on his memory and his actions. The embrace that he carries with him and his work spending time with people on death row and his work spending time with CEOs of the Fortune 500. It's building trust, spending time returning to those who are suffering the most. Now, I think we sometimes kid ourselves in thinking that we are not already proximate with those who are suffering. Some of us in our congregation are already suffering economic hardship, suffering under policies because they are transgender or non-binary. There is already suffering in our midst, and we are already proximate with each other, except we don't always talk about such things. There's another side of getting proximate too that I know is on a lot of people's minds right now. This question: do we need to get proximate with those who do not agree with us? With people who may be supporting a different candidate or different policies than us? Now, I want to be clear on this. You do not have to spend your precious time, precious minutes of your life with people who want to take away your rights to life, to liberty, to freedom, to this pursuit of happiness. You do not have to spend time with people who do not want you to have the same rights that they enjoy. That is not getting proximate. That's not what we're talking about. That's just abusive. However, if someone you love and disagree with in a lower stakes way, someone who you disagree with but who ultimately cares for your freedom and your rights, well, then that might be worth your time to hear their story. Perhaps you disagree about an issue, not the issue of your right to live and be free, but to move in or to move in spaces that humanize you, but another kind of issue. Well, they may be suffering in some way you did not realize. And it may be worth your precious time to hear their suffering, to understand how they may be suffering, not to argue them out of it, but to listen, to understand. Now, we are entering into a new worship series together we are calling Tikkun Olam. That's a Hebrew phrase meaning world repair. The phrase Tikkun Olam remains connected with the human responsibility for fixing what is wrong with the world. And in the Mishnah, which is the body of classical rabbinic teachings, Tikkun Olam refers to social policy legislation providing extra protection to those who are disadvantaged. Governing, for example, conditions for the writing of divorce decrees and the freeing of slaves. We repair the world by placing ourselves in close proximity, creating an authentic interchange of the heart with those who are the most affected by inhumane public policies. And in true relationship, all things are possible. So, when it comes time for us to take action, whether it be designing our new campus for UUCA or taking a public stand for racial justice, how do we know which is the right action? How do we know what to write on our signs at the protest? If we have gotten proximate with those who suffer the most under racial oppression, well, they will tell you what to write on your sign. They will tell you what policy changes will help them the most. They will tell you what design will make our congregation's campus the most welcoming to them, who may be feeling welcome elsewhere. This is how we repair the world, by acting out of obligation to the close relationships we have formed with those who suffer the most in our time. And we will continue this series, Tikkun Olam, throughout the next 6 weeks. This will chart our path towards world repair, and this will get us through a deeply troubling and anxious election season together. And I want to leave us today with the words of the English rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, once again, who speaks about the us of responsibility. He says, "Do you know something? My favorite phrase in all of politics is a very American phrase. It's we the people. Why we the people? Because it says that we all share collective responsibility for our collective future. That's how things really are and should be. Have you noticed how magical thinking has taken over our politics? We say, all you've got to do is elect a strong leader and he or she will solve all of our problems for us. Now this is magical thinking. Then that's how we get the extremes. Then the far right, the far left, extreme religious, the extreme anti-religious, the far right dreaming of a golden age that never was. And the religious and the anti-religious equally convinced that all it takes is God or the absence of God to save us from ourselves. But that too is magical thinking, because the only people who will save us from ourselves is we the people. All of us together. When we do that, when we move from the politics of me to the politics of all of us together, we rediscover those beautiful, counterintuitive truths that a nation is strong when it cares for the weak, that it becomes rich when it cares for the poor, it becomes invulnerable when it cares about the vulnerable. That is what makes great nations. So, this is a simple suggestion from Rabbi Sacks. It might just change your life. It might just help you to change the world. Do a search and replace operation on the text of your mind. Wherever you encounter the word self, give me a minute, hold on. Wherever you encounter the word self, substitute the word other. Instead of self-help, other help. Instead of self-esteem, other esteem. If you do that, you will begin to feel the power of what for me is one of the most moving sentences in all of religious literature. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you are with me. We can face any future without fear, so long as we know we will not face it alone. For the sake of the future you, together, let us strengthen the future us. Amen. Blessed be. May it be so.